When you spoke to officers, you were asked if you recalled that Curly had come into work that morning, and you said that he did. Is that right?
Yes.
And with regard to that, based upon your view of what was occurring, did you further indicate that you thought that was strange?
Yeah, I did. I just, but I guess, after I thought about it, everybody's got their own way of dealing with things, but I wouldn't have went to work. I'd have been out looking for her, but everybody's got their own way of dealing with things, I guess.
And did you tell law enforcement, if my wife went missing, I'd be a wreck and would be out looking for her?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to leading.
Yeah, I agree. You've asked a question. You have to ask open-ended questions.
And you could see that this witness, a former co-worker of the defendant, doesn't want to judge him, but the jury has to judge him. That's their job. That's what this trial is all about. Judging the actions, the reactions, and the evidence in the case against Jim Prokopovitz to see if it's enough to prove murder in this case. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter, who's joining us from Green Bay, Wisconsin tonight. Chanley, great to see you. Today, and we've seen this in other cases, and we'll see it in future trials because it's always relevant. It's important evidence. It may not be the most important, but in this case, it seems to carry a little bit more weight because some of that other evidence really isn't there.
Exactly. It's circumstantial evidence that piece by piece the prosecutor is calling in former co-workers of the defendant, those who were involved with the searches or the vigils for the missing Victoria, his wife at the time, and his children, his stepchildren that we've heard from also talking about his odd and strange reaction to his wife of 24 years going missing. And yet every time on cross-examination, we hear the defense attorney bringing back up, well, that's how you would have reacted or your perception of him, but how well do you know Jim Prokopovitz? Did you meet him before this? He was a stranger to you. You don't know if that's how he is just then or how he is all the time. And so it's a little bit of a piece of evidence that cuts both ways, Vinnie, because you can see where that would be odd behavior, but at the same time, maybe that's just Jim Prokopovitz. Right.
You have to understand what his baseline is. But the bottom line is the day that Victoria goes missing, he goes to work like any other day.
He certainly does. In fact, he goes to work in the morning and doesn't call 911 that his wife is missing until hours later in the afternoon. And at that point, he calls the police come, he shows them around the house, and there's some more delay. Oh, well, maybe she's there or here. All of this adding up together, plus his comments to the searchers, which we heard yesterday from his daughter, Marcia, saying, oh, they're wasting their time. Victoria's gone. She'll never be found or she'll never return. And even some of the evidence today about how he would become hostile even to some of the searchers, just trying to help him out, trying to find his missing wife. And if the jury, which I see taking a plethora of notes all day long, put all these pieces together, that may outweigh any sort of defense. Oh, well, that was just old Jim Prokopovitz.
Now, there was one moment today, and I want to play this because it wasn't all like, he wasn't affected by this. There was some testimony that seemed to humanize the defendant. Let's take a listen.
Did you interact with Mr. Prokopovitz outside of the work day?
There was a few times I saw him, like when we were done at the job site. I'd see him at the shop and talk to him a little bit.
And did you notice anything about his demeanor about after his wife went missing?
Not really, except for one day. It was a few days later. I just happened to pull up and get loaded for sludge, and Curly was sitting in the loader, and he had his head down. Just kind of looked like he was crying. That's the way I took it.
Okay. And was that the first time you've ever really seen emotion coming out of Curly?
Yeah.
Do you ever know Curly to miss a day of work?
No.
Hard worker?
Yeah.
Like yourself?
Yeah.
And you don't have any indication about where Victoria Prokopovitz went, do you?
I have no idea where she is.
No further questions, Your Honor.
a good moment for the defense there. I mean, he's emotionally hit by this, but also, he's a hard worker. And I'm getting the feeling from all of these witnesses who testified today that that's kind of like a mantra out there. I mean, this is a part of the country where people wake up, they work hard to earn a living, and it's just, this is what you do. You don't look for a day off. You don't look for a way out. You look for your lunch pail and you head out and you do your job.
Yeah, and that was what the testimony was, even though they say, oh, well, I would have told someone, or maybe it was odd if my wife had been missing. But at the same time, the evidence in the testimony was they didn't talk to Curly about his personal life. And when they did talk, it was all business, what they were working on. And they didn't talk about their family matters or personal things. So again, on cross-examination, the defense is able to come back through and say, well, you never really did talk about his wife. You didn't know about Victoria Prokopovitz in a normal conversation, so why would it be any different that day? So yeah, this was interesting testimony today. And I think really what the jury was able to take away was right there, because every time on cross-examination we knew that he was a hard worker, that he was kind of kept to himself, that he rarely missed work at all. He was always showing up, and that he was a hard worker.
And I could imagine there's probably several folks just like that in that jury box who live that same kind of life. I mean, it's a mentality, it's an approach. You don't talk about your personal business at work. You get the job done, whatever it is, and then you go home and you have dinner, you maybe watch a little TV, and then you go to sleep because you got to wake up and do it again the next day. Now, you mentioned the search party. Let's listen to a couple of the women who were on that search party with their observations.
At a certain point during the search, did Marcia and Stacy point out James Prokopovitz?
They did, when he came into the town hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you see how long Mr. Prokopovitz was at that first search?
It didn't seem very long. I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes.
And how long was the search in total?
We were probably there a good 4 hours, 5 hours.
Did you observe Mr. Prokopovitz on that day?
I did.
And what sort of observations did you make?
I didn't see a person that showed emotion that his wife was missing.
And I guess prior to this first search, had you ever seen Mr. Prokopovitz or met him previously?
I have not.
You listed a group of people who were assisting in the search on that date. Was James Prokopovitz one of those people?
No, he wasn't.
Did you become aware whether or not he was at the residence?
Yes.
And was he?
I was told that Stacy and Marcia went into the home after we were there for quite a while. I was told that he was sleeping in the recliner and didn't care to come out of the home.
That's a little more problematic, right? I have a picture of like Archie Bunker sleeping in his recliner. But is it after a hard day of work? Is he preparing for another hard day of work? This might be a little bit more of a tough sell in that, he spends 10 minutes, everyone else is working 4 hours. Everyone's out there, he's sleeping on the recliner. That was, I think, a better moment for prosecutors.
Yeah, he didn't do himself any favors, Vinnie, back when this was happening, right, with some of these behaviors. Because, again, I counted 6 to 7 witnesses today, all telling this same story, giving their own personal experience with the defendant back when they were searching or at a vigil. There was one story by Julie Smith, a friend of the stepdaughter of the defendant, who talked about she even went to Jim's house and knocked on the door to ask for directions to where to go. She was taking food to help feed the searchers who were working long hours, and he basically shut the door in her face. And she said it just made her uncomfortable. She had a bad feeling in the pit of her stomach. And then story after story like that all day long, Vinnie, really adds up in front of a jury.
Yeah, I mean, and Scott Peterson, back in the day, at least he was at the hotel and helping with the searchers, and during the vigil he would sneak off and and talked to Amber Fry on the phone, but at least he, pretended to care. This could be problematic. We'll see how the defense, what they can do with it during closing arguments. You mentioned the vigils. Here's Rhonda Schmidt, former neighbor, who was at the vigil. Take a listen.
James Prokopovitz was at that vigil,
Yes, he was.
and you said this was 1 year, so this would have been late April of 2014?
Yes.
And I guess, what sort of observations did you make of Mr. Prokopovitz's demeanor?
I didn't think he was engaged with anything Marcia was saying or any of the group that was there on behalf of Vicki.
And you were asked questions that you'd never met Mr. Prokopovitz before, correct?
I have never met him before.
Okay. The observations you made of him on those occasions, though, did that seem to be a reasonable reaction in your mind?
Not in my mind.
Chanley, I want to switch gears a little bit here. What was the exact type of work that Prokopovitz did? What was this job, that work that he was going to each day?
Yeah, he operated heavy equipment or machinery there and worked with a truck driver, but we heard a testimony from Green Bay Packaging here and talking about that he would help load waste from the paper, a company that made paper, and he'd load the waste into sludge ponds or a landfill type area. And he had access to these areas, and we learned about how these areas, there was no security cameras, and that people who had access could go there at any time, day or night, that only during the day is when they would have people handling the gate or access in and out of these areas. And all this testimony really to show that these are possibilities perhaps that the defendant could have placed or hidden the body of his wife in any of these areas, and would have been almost impossible for authorities to find it.
So what we're talking about here is a case built on motive, right? The girlfriend tired, the expense of dealing with the wife of 24 years with all her medical problems, plus Girl Fridays now available, and opportunity. So laying out, okay, well, if she died, where could she have possibly gone? Because you mentioned this, let's listen to Richard Jones, who's a former employee at that company where the landfill is.
At the time, you've referred to the fact that out at the landfill was this padlock. You indicated there were keys to open it, is that right?
Yes.
And who would have access to those keys then?
The McKeefrey personnel, but typically it would be the landfill operator that would be have ownership of that key.
And if Curley had told law enforcement he had access to the keys, that would make sense?
Yes.
Now, you indicated there were no cameras out at the landfill. There was no formal check-in system. There wasn't really a security system out there either at that time, was there?
That's correct.
So there's the opportunity. Chanley, we have to go, but really quickly, have prosecutors laid out any sort of a timeline yet, a clear timeline for this jury?
As far as what happened, well, we know that she disappeared the evening, sometime during the evening. We don't know when. We just know that when the son, Wesley Edges, came home around 4 a.m. or so, that's when Jim Prokopovitz was also returning home. His son sees him return around that 4 a.m. time. And again, the son leaves the night before around 6 or 7 at night. So there's that window of, we're not really sure what happens at the Prokopovitz home.
There you go. That's your opportunity. Chanley Painter, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vinnie.